On this episode of Eager to Know, 80s music, no jacket required, and why my guest says thank you for your service whenever he meets a teacher. We all have a creative part of our brain, whether we use it or not, for generating new ideas, problem solving, and just viewing ourselves in this world. I am Ricky McGeckran, an artist living in Chicago, and I am eager to know and share with you all how people of a creative leaning have brought this way of thinking to the forefront and how it has shifted outcomes.
Get a little bit closer, little closer, 'cause we don't wanna be alone. Don't wanna be closer, just a little closer, 'cause we don't wanna be alone. Don't wanna be.
Sunny, vibrant, electropop new wave from Chicago, BESTMAN is the creation of multi-instrumentalist Brian Clouthier. 143 is the latest single that you just heard, and it will be followed by additional tracks coming out over the next few months. I spoke with Brian about this new project and his musical path so far. The series of music coming out, are you considering this a collection that all relates, or do you look at this as individual pieces of work?
That's a great question. I think that if we're doing it kind of how we're intending, or if it's at least received how we're intending, is that it will feel kind of like a collection that's based in at least a similar direction and similar ideas. I think that the sound is going to sound, or at least the kind of the sonic element of it is going to be pretty similar in all the tracks. It's not necessarily like a concept where there's an overarching story or anything like that, but we're hoping, or at least when I write and record, I hope that it does feel like this kind of continuous, or that has some continuity to it as you're listening to multiple tracks. So if all goes well, it will feel like kind of everything is related as it's released. It'll just be kind of moving into the spring. Probably we'll start working in some of the vibes will be a little more kind of spring and summer, and right now in the winter time, maybe we'll kind of get that feeling as well. But this first track that's coming out is called 143, and I think it's definitely a really good culmination of everything that we've been focusing on for the past probably year or so in the writing and recording process.
So when you said that everything kind of has I forget the word you use, a sonic, what was it?
Sure, yeah. There's definitely the sonic quality.
Sonic quality.
Yeah, exactly.
So where does that come from? Where does the inspiration come from? I know when I'm doing a new painting series, I kind of have a general direction that I feel I want to do. I either want to enhance something that I did previously, or I observed something that excited me, and I want to explore that visually. How does it work? Like, how do you have like a bunch of sonic directions and you decide to pick one? Where does that all originate from?
Well, I think that, kind of to take it back, maybe even a little further and talk about kind of the genesis of this project, is that I really wanted to emulate, and not in any kind of patronizing way. I didn't want it to seem like I was aping anything or kind of using it as a novelty by any means. But when I think back to some of the sounds that are most interesting to me, they're coming out of the 80s. And I was born in the early 80s, so it's not like I can say that I experienced a ton of that. But it seems to resonate with me more than anything. And I think that in that kind of emulation factor, right, is that I want to, take some of those sounds that I find really, really inspiring, because at that time, there was so much experimentation going on, and especially with synthesizers and electronic, elements, drum machines. That stuff really, really excites me, and I wanted to, kind of take at least the songwriting that I had come to know in myself and work that into the kind of production element of it. So it was really, really important for someone to kind of listen to it and say, hey, that sounds familiar, but it doesn't sound like I'm, trying to, specifically gimmick it.
Okay, that makes total
Right.
sense to me. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and
definitely.
and so I've had this conversation quite a few times with people when I kind of try to explain, that initial question that people, when I say, oh, I'm in a band or I'm a musician, right?
Yep.
They'll say, oh, well, what kind of music is
Uh-huh.
it, right? And that's, and as an artist, it's kind of hard to quantify that necessarily,
Yep.
without comparing it to something else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then it's weird. Like, am I trying to say that I'm like that other
Yeah.
artist? So sometimes it is hard to express it.
Right.
I completely relate to that.
And also, especially when, I guess when you're talking about 80s music, there is something that maybe could be a little kitschy about it, or that a lot of people use it in, kind of modern elements in still in pop music. It, can definitely sound like that there are, that there's a gimmick quality to it. And when I was writing stuff, I wanted to say, hey, is there really a way to get these elements in, these these production elements in,
Yep.
but still have it be like my songs, essentially.
Yep. Have your own, have yourself in it.
Yeah, and so usually what I say is okay, it's 80s influenced synth pop, but not the cheesy kind.
Okay. I get that.
You know what I mean? Because I think that there can be a connotation involved with it a bit, and I think that when people think of 80s pop music, they think of karaoke or
Okay.
you know what I mean? And
Well, I don't, because I was in high school in the 80s.
Yeah.
So I grew up on 80s music. So when you think of, like, what is your favorite, do you have a favorite 80s group or song or collection of songs, or is it?
yeah, and so this is probably one of the most divisive conversations that I have with
All right, I'm
people.
ready.
Because when I talk about my biggest musical influence, at least in this writing process, it's Phil Collins.
Okay.
Okay, and
Like,
so
like In the Air Tonight.
yeah, exactly right. Face
Studio.
Value, right? Yeah, No Jacket Required. Like that is those songs to me have every single element of what I really appreciate about that era of music. And
What about Against All Odds? I love that song.
I-
Do
yeah.
you know that song?
I absolutely do. And so my mom actually gave me it was incredibly thoughtful of her, and this was very recently, gave me a copy of of Face Values that was original pressing.
Okay.
That some guy gave to her because he basically had a crush on her.
Okay.
And he was kind of trying to impress her. And this is, I'm not saying this was years and years ago. I'm saying this was very recent, that maybe my mom was having a conversation with this guy, and he's like, oh, he likes Phil Collins. Well, here you go. And I happen to be a lucky recipient of that situation. But when I find I have the Phil Collins conversation, a lot of people are like, oh, that's where the cheesy kind of aspect comes in. And,
Right.
there do seem to happen to be a couple different camps when it comes to Phil Collins, or even going into Genesis.
Yeah, I was going to
as
say,
well.
he was in Genesis.
Yeah.
So wait a minute. Did Peter Gabriel come from Genesis too?
Exactly.
So do you know Peter Gabriel's So? My two favorite 80s albums
Okay.
is Peter Gabriel So,
Okay.
which I don't know if you like that.
Well, so here's the deal: is I would probably, if you showed me the album cover, I could probably say, oh yeah. But if you asked me to, give the track listing of that, I probably
So it's the
wouldn't be able to
one
say
with
it.
it's just his face. It's kind of cut off, and it's black and white.
Yeah.
And it has Red Rain.
Yes.
In Your Eyes. All this stuff. And my other favorite is Tears for Fears song from The Big Chair.
And so that's probably that would probably be in my top 5 records of influences.
Really?
Probably.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
and not necessarily that record as much as the documentary that was released along with that was called Stories from the Big Chair, which is kind of that tour.
I was not aware of this. I
Yeah.
have to check this out.
Yeah, it's really great, and so it shows them playing live in that era, which is exciting to me because it's not necessarily synthesizing that record. You know, they're not playing. It doesn't. Their live performances don't necessarily sound like the record.
Okay.
But that you just realize that how talented those musicians were.
Yeah.
You know, when they're playing, they're not playing to a click track like we do on stage, which is, you know, if people aren't familiar, that basically it's our drummer has a metronome.
Okay.
Because we have a track that is playing along with us that has little production elements.
So does it have just like cues to tell you where?
So
where
what
to
our
go?
drummer is hearing is he's hearing essentially a track that has a metronome on it.
Okay.
That's synced along to a track that has little musical elements. So it might be like a little synth line or something that we're trying to beef up essentially the live aspect.
Okay.
We also don't want it to seem like we're not doing anything on stage. So
Sure, yeah.
you know, we definitely are performing live, and but we wanted to still have some of those production elements in it, and you know, a little bit of vocal and stuff like that. That really, I think, kind of beefs up the live sound, gives it a lot of energy as well. And back then, a lot of guys, you know, they were talented enough that they didn't need that to have a little bit of backing track and behind it. So when I get really, really excited because I know that at that time these guys were kind of just creating something organically.
Yeah.
Right. There wasn't the social media aspect. So when, you know, a bunch of guys, there's a great documentary, by the way, if you're into synth pop in general, and especially British synth pop during the 80s, it's called Synth Britannia.
Okay.
And it's about all those guys, right? Human League and ABC and just I'm trying to think of some of the other
Shoot that
ones.
poison arrow through my heart.
Yeah, right.
I
Yeah,
love that
and a lot of
song.
those guys, you know, they were from different parts of England, but somehow were creating the same type of music without really knowing what the other was doing. It was kind of this collective conscious kind of thing.
Interesting.
And you know, at that time, you know, synthesizers were starting to become kind of affordable, essentially.
okay.
So, you know, these kind of factory working teenagers essentially would
Able to produce
they'd
stuff,
spend their money and they would go get one and bring it home and start goofing around on it, and essentially a style of music was born, which I think is really, really incredible.
So can we talk about live performance? Because that's an interesting aspect to your art. You're in the studio producing the work with, you know, there's the intention, I guess, to perform it live, but then there's also an intention to record it and share it that way. Can you tell me about what that's like? When you're creating it, are you creating it thinking that it's being performed live? Are you thinking that it's going to be, you know, listened by an individual on their iPhone?
Well, so I have a bit of an internal struggle when it comes to that, because there's part of me that just wants to sit behind a computer or behind a board, as they would say, like, you know, and produce music and engineer and create. There's also a part of me that really, really enjoys performing live. I come from a performance background. I have done musical theater and opera, and I went to school to be an actor, and performing in front of people is a very natural thing for me, and a very enjoyable thing for me as well. So, you know, I oftentimes, you know, kind of go through that process of thinking, well, wouldn't it be awesome to just sit here in a studio and create music all day?
Sure.
Right. And just write and write and write. There is also an element that doesn't necessarily maybe want to be behind the scenes and really enjoys the fact that I can be on stage and entertain, or at least hopefully entertain, right? And and see that reaction, you know, and kind of experience that that relationship that happens between the spectator and the performer.
Yeah, what is that like? I mean, I always hear performers talk about that.
Yeah.
That it's like a relationship or a conversation that's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, I mean, it can be really subtle things. Like for me, just seeing people dancing, because when I see people dancing to my music, I know that can kind of be kind of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Indicator?
Oh, not necessarily an indicator, but that it's... I'm going to try to think of this word right here because this might be interesting. Involuntary is what I want to say, is that sometimes, that foot tapping or that little bit of head movement or something like that, it's not, they're not, maybe not necessarily jamming out per se, but I can see that maybe I'm connecting a bit.
I can totally get that.
Yeah. And then, taking it further than that to see people smiling and enjoying what you're doing is probably one of the most, I guess, one of the strongest feelings because it's immediate.
Yeah.
Right? You're seeing gratification essentially, like immediately. And I think that feeds the energy that's happening, and then you are reacting with your other musicians on stage, and all of a sudden it just becomes this big kind of this collection of energy and emotion between the entire room. And there can be some I guess trite elements of saying that we do this for the fans kind of thing.
Yep.
There's a little bit of truth to that.
Yeah.
I want to elicit a reaction from people, preferably positive.
Yeah.
And I think that as a performer, or performing artist, I should say, that's probably the strongest kind of gratification that you can get, is to see it as it's happening.
Yeah. Do you feel like you get to see your art in a different way? Because I feel like when you're in the studio behind your computer creating this, obviously there's a vision, there's all this work, all of the detail, and what you think the end state should be. And I'm wondering if when you perform it and you see people reacting to different parts of the song or reacting in a way that you wouldn't have expected, does that make you see it in a whole different way?
Well, yeah. And I mean, to be truthful with you, I mean, to even take it to the negative aspect, is that I have seen it in an aspect which is a very powerful experience, is when you are creating something and you're feeling it, right? And you're feeling very positive about it. And then you do push it out there, and to not get a reaction or to see the maybe illicit is tough. And I mean, I can think of a few shows where we were, debuting something that we've worked on for a few weeks, and you're feeling really good about it. And, it's a late night and half the room walks out.
I can imagine.
And it wasn't necessarily, it might not necessarily been that it was terrible by any means, but all of a sudden people realized, hey, I can go grab a drink. Hey, I want to go have that conversation or something.
That's the opposite of the head nod, the foot tap.
Exactly.
That's an involuntary, I'm going to get a drink.
And for me, I think that that is the opposite of that, right? Because that's that critique that is immediate, that all of a sudden takes the energy away.
Yeah.
And I'll be truthful, it can definitely feel emotional because that's something that you're passionate about, and you're, I mean, I can only assume that that as you become more experienced with that, and that you can tend to maybe brush it off, or maybe you never do.
Yeah. I think that see, this brings up something that I tell people a lot about being an artist, is I feel like it's very bipolar, that the highs are very high and the lows are very low. Because when I was in a job that I wasn't creating artwork, I was part of like a big team. So even if we were successful, it didn't really matter as much to me, because I was just one person, or I was expressing, I worked in consulting. So the success was about the vision of some big brand. It wasn't my brand. But as an artist, if I'm working on a single painting, it means so much to me that when you get that foot tapping, or people, people decide to go for a drink, it's either it feels so amazing or it's really devastating in a way that I don't know if people who aren't artists necessarily could appreciate.
Yeah. And I have had that conversation with people before about just creative outlet in general, right? Because you were talking about being in a situation where you weren't creating art, right? You were in a career where you necessarily weren't creating art. You didn't feel maybe like an individual. It's super important, I think, to still, whether you're working at CDW or whether you're on a garbage truck.
Okay.
If you're passionate about being creative, it's really important to have that. Some people have it at home and it's their scrapbook collection or something like that. There are other people that choose to share it. And I think that some people don't understand that when you do choose to share it, for the most part, it could be a very vulnerable experience.
Yes.
And that's because you want your passions to translate with others, because why wouldn't someone else get excited about this thing, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And especially when you put a lot of effort into it, I think that it's definitely important to get some kind of reaction, because then you feel, well, maybe why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Or why am I sharing it at least? So, I think that I think that you can relate to some people to a degree by saying, all right, what is something that you're passionate about? And, whether it be, say they're cycling or something like that.
Yep.
Then you're saying, well, imagine how that experience makes you feel, if it's euphoric or if it's cathartic, however, and then imagine, trying to impose that on as many people as possible. And I think it doesn't necessarily make sense to some people. It's like, well, why would I want to put myself in that scenario, or why would I want to make myself feel that way?
Yeah.
And I think that the slightest bit of motivation that you can get when you are passionate about something, whether it be someone's reaction to it, or someone just gives you a little positive feedback, it really has the ability to push you further, I think. And it might just be the slightest little bit, but for me, I think that's the most, that tells me that it is something that's important to me. It's because, all I need is a little bit of feedback or a little bit of positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
And it just really propels me, right?
I can relate to that.
Yeah, something really deep down that makes you, that just brings joy or something. But one of our last shows that we played, it might not sound like a lot to some other more established musicians, but there was a large group of people that came to see us because they had actually saw us at one of our last shows randomly. They did not come to see us. And I was at the bar after the show, and guy came up to me. He's like, oh, awesome job kind of thing. I was like, oh, very cool. Like, who'd you come to see tonight? And he goes, you. And I went, really? It might not sound like much. I was like, wow, that's kind of surprising and cool. And that means that, if I'm reaching in my little sphere, just a few folks, sometimes that's enough. But obviously, I want to be able to, have the biggest impact that I can. And so, those little bit of those experiences, those little reactions that I have from people, it just has the ability to kind of to lift up a bit and push and hopefully, create enough motivation. Because I think as an independent artist in any field, that motivation factor is really, really important. Right?
Yeah, I would agree. It's really important to find something. And I would agree with you that it doesn't always take a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes the littlest thing can just really push you. It can be just that breeze in your sails, that the slightest breeze can really push you forward.
Yeah, hopefully.
So tell me about your childhood as it relates to music. Was music something that was always in your home? Was it something that you always listened to?
Yeah. So, I grew up, it was just me and my dad. And my dad listened to a lot of kind of Southern rock, Pure Prairie League, and Lynyrd Skynyrd and stuff like that. That's what I really remember. And then the Beatles.
Okay.
And you could always get on a Beatles tangent, and I won't. But my dad tells me of a memory that he has of him playing guitar. And I don't remember a lot of my dad playing guitar, to be honest with you. But my dad was playing guitar, and I guess went into the other room, and I was a very small child, and was pointing to to something in the closet, and it was a toy guitar.
Oh.
And so my dad pulled it down, and I did a little, jangle on it and stuff like that. Singing was something that I really, really loved. And the guitar kind of aspect didn't really kind of take shape until I got into high school. I wanted to play drums.
So wait, so singing as like a little kid singing along to the radio?
Singing along to the radio, singing in front of people. I absolutely loved it. And then in fifth grade, we had a new chorus teacher. And this is why I always say, whenever I meet a teacher, I always say, thank you for your service, right? Because, I really remember, a very specific teacher from a very long time ago
Yep.
who brought in some musical theater, actually some operettas. We did Pirates of Penzance
Okay.
when I was in fifth grade, and it really changed my life. I can't, really explain it any other way.
I can see that.
That I really got interested in theater, and so I started doing that. And then along the way, I also got into the idea of being a rock star a bit, and I wanted to play drums. And I think my dad did not want drums in the house.
Shocker.
So he was like, "Oh, how about this guitar? Because this is how you get the girls, essentially." And so I picked up the guitar, and he taught me a few chords, and then I really took off and just immediately became, enthralled by it, and never took a lesson, which is probably a detriment at this point, I think. But taught myself, and started writing songs really early on. And I actually,
Wow. So writing songs.
yeah, like I never really got into the wanting to play other people's music. Like,
Isn't that
yeah.
interesting? Why? That's very interesting.
And I think it was more of a fact that I wanted to have kind of my own impression or my own stamp on it.
Sure, but that is interesting to me that a youngster would have the desire to create their own music. Because when I think of musical kids, I think of kids who liked, reproducing other
Sure.
stuff.
Yeah.
So that's surprising to me. That's great.
Right. And, gosh, I hate to, kind of put on the old man cardigan and stuff, but we didn't have YouTube. We didn't have access to kind of the social aspect that
You couldn't
do
have been
now.
Justin Bieber.
I couldn't have been,
because
right,
Justin
exactly.
Bieber was discovered
Exactly,
on YouTube. I just
right?
found
And-
this out like a
and
month
he-
ago.
and he
I
went,
had no
went on
idea.
Ellen and all that, right? I think that was kind of how it all started.
Yes.
And yeah, it definitely wasn't like that. I started writing, kind of silly stuff, and I was always a bit of a class clown. I think it was a way for me also to show off a bit.
So would you say that writing and performing, was that a creative outlet, or would you say it was more about a way to get attention, or both?
Oh boy, I would probably, knowing my personality, I would say that it probably was both. I think that performing always just came very, very natural to me as well. And every high school kind of story has the guy at the party with the guitar kind of thing playing songs, and I happen to be that person sometimes. Sometimes I also would say, like, I'm not your jukebox. Like, but at the same time, it's like, hey, who wants to sit at a party and listen to some 17-year-old kid's songs?
So you would perform your songs?
And sometimes people would ask me to perform my song because they were silly.
Okay.
There weren't a lot of, I definitely had a girlfriend in high school that I wrote some songs for.
Okay.
And I think the overarching storyline for me as far as my songwriting goes is that it's been about women.
Okay.
I don't really write about politics or about life lessons or anything like that. Usually it's about bittersweet kind of tryst kind of or maybe kind of that summer love, the fleeting romance, like kind of thing. There's something very nostalgic about it.
Absolutely, and people relate to that.
I think it relates to it, and I think that it lends well with the style of music as well.
Okay.
But kind of going back to playing and writing music when I was in high school, I was listening to some pretty bad music, I think, for a lot of my life. And when I say bad, I mean just straight, alternative rock,
Like
Q101. I mean, like, geez.
I don't know. I'm from Boston, so
Yeah.
I don't know what Q101 is.
Oh, Q101 was, and I think I could say was now, terrestrial radio is, who knows, but Q101 was our alternative radio station. So think Smashing Pumpkins
Okay.
and Pearl Jam
Gotcha. Okay.
and stuff like that. But I was going into the, I was probably listening to Train or
Okay.
something like that. It wasn't until I got to college that I, had my musical awakening, I guess.
Okay.
And I started writing music that was influenced by bands like in kind of the pop punk scene. One of my favorite bands was Jimmy Eat World, and when I started writing music that was kind of in that vein, I was able to kind of bring in pop music elements as well.
Okay.
That, for some reason, in the back of my mind, pop music was always kind of pushing forward.
Okay.
So how can I take those pop elements and still have it in music that I feel speaks to me and is relevant to me as well? Because I'm not a pop artist, and there's no way that I could be. But how can I bring those elements into stuff that I was writing at the time? And that's kind of what Best Man turned into. It was really, all of my previous experience of songwriting and those styles of music, and then incorporating these pop elements, and then the synthesizers and kind of production elements of 80s music. And for the first time in a really long time, I felt like, wow, this is me. This is kind of my personality and my experiences all really just kind of gift wrapped into this project. The genesis of the project was after my first trip out to California. I was looking forward to it a bit, and then I went out there and I was like, oh man, my friends lived in a dingy apartment, and there were helicopters flying over.
So it wasn't quite it wasn't the Hollywood experience.
It was definitely
you
not the Hollywood
expected.
experience, but I think in a little element of it that it was kind of that experience that maybe I had thought it was. I didn't see the Pacific Ocean until I was flying out of LAX, and that really kind of spoke to me. Is that I was like, man, it was really not that positive experience.
Okay.
Well, then my best friend decides he's going to get married and asked me to be the best man, and
Oh.
I was like, okay, I'm going to throw a bachelor party out there, and then one in Chicago as well, because he has friends out there. That's where his life is now. We'll celebrate out there, and then we'll come back and do it again, kind of thing. And he had been living out there for a few years and had kind of gotten acclimated and kind of found the LA that he liked. And when we got there, all of a sudden it was like a whole different experience. We went to Venice Beach, and we went hiking in Topanga Canyon, and went to the ocean down in Malibu. I mean, it was
So something changed.
and really, I kind of understood that there can be a romance involved in it. It's like, oh, maybe this is what the Beach Boys are talking about,
Okay.
or this is what Fleetwood Mac was kind of feeling when they were recording Rumors and stuff. And so when I came back to Chicago, I had actually gotten a bit influenced, or at least inspired by, I don't know, there's this beachy kind of
By the experience.
but and so I really made it a point to I started writing music like right away. I was like, how did this experience make me feel? He had his wedding in Central Illinois on his wife's homestead, and it was one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had. All the friends that we grew up with and then met in college, and we just had this really incredible night. And I came home and immediately started creating. And I was in a bit of a rut, I think, at that point. So it was very inspiring.
So when you say you came home and you started writing,
Yeah.
How does that start? Is it writing lyrics? Is it?
So for me, the writing process is always musical first. Is that I write melody and I build instruments on top of each other and stuff like that. The lyric portion and that kind of songwriting is my least favorite part.
So when you build a melody, what do you start with?
Boy, I think that
Like a piano?
So I
or-
start at the piano. So I'm mostly working at the piano, and then I bring guitar in after. I'll tell you what, there are some times that I'll pick up a guitar and start writing, and it'll be a completely different experience as far as how the songwriting goes. I'm much more comfortable on guitar,
Okay.
but BESTMAN has become about kind of synthesizers and keyboards and stuff like that. The guitar is really making more of kind of an atmospheric kind of element. So it's definitely not featured.
So if you're starting with a piano, and I'm
Yeah.
and I'm trying to map this to how I do a painting, because when I do a painting, I do a underpainting in a single color, and it's basically the whole landscape of the painting. Like you could come in and look at this underpainting, and you will know pretty much exactly what it's going to be. Would you say you do the same thing? Do you do like a skeleton of the whole thing with piano initially, or how does that work?
No, I think that's actually a really good kind of description of how my songs are created as well, because that foundation is that is either a bass line or
Right.
or a synth melody. All of a sudden, you start layering things on top of it.
Gotcha.
And I think a lot of times that I'll write like a quarter of a song, and it'll be the full kind of the full production of it. Is that I can write like
Meaning you'll have layered everything in.
I'll have pretty much layered everything in, and it'll be like maybe just a minute and 30 seconds
Okay,
of something, right?
interesting.
And there is, I think that, and then all of a sudden you can get stuck.
Yeah.
You're like, oh my God, like all of a sudden you're just, all this kind of creative energy is running through you, and you know all the chords where they want to go and stuff, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, that was part A. What happens next?
Yep.
And it could sit for a while, and I mean, I'm not sure how it is for you as a painter, but I mean, I there are times when I can write a song in a day.
Yep.
There are other times when it'll take me a couple years, when I will set it aside. I'll come back to it, and all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, maybe I'll take a little bit of this and pepper it into
Yep.
something else that I was working on. And with digital music, it's super easy to just kind of
Yeah.
cut and paste and stuff like that. But yeah, some of my favorite songs I've written in hours,
Yep.
and there's other stuff that has really taken me a long time. But the layering aspect is always something that's part of it, is that there will be this really simple skeleton, and you kind of start layering stuff on top
Yep.
of it and creating more of this, I guess the only word I can think of is just kind of an ambiance or an atmosphere
Yep.
to it.
Yep. No, that makes total
An
sense.
environment, whatever I'm trying to create. The lyrics come in usually like 2 days before I'm recording the song.
Yeah. So that sounds like
Yeah.
the equivalent of like the highlights of a painting.
Yeah.
So what you're describing, it sounds very similar to what I do,
Mm-hmm.
and where I will, as I mentioned, I will do an underpainting. But then there's the atmosphere, which is, okay, do I want this to be a loose painting, or do I want this to be like really tight, or do I want it to be painterly? And then there's also, the hue and color scheme. Do I want this like super bright,
Yeah.
saturated colors, or do I want it desaturated? But it all starts with the underpainting. But then also there's challenges where I get stuck, and it's really frustrating, especially when I know, and you probably can relate to this, when I know that I have something that can be amazing and really good, but I'm stuck, and it's very frustrating and confusing, because I know that this is going to work, and but you just have to stick with it, and eventually it does work itself out.
Well, and I'll tell you what, I think that I have a bit more of a benefit than you would in that element, because I can bring it to other people that I play music with.
Sure.
And so, that is something that as a creative individual, especially a songwriter, is that you find yourself sometimes really wanting to bounce ideas off of other people and to get that inspiration from another aspect, because, I definitely feel like that there's a lot of times when I have kind of reached a limit as far as what I'm, kind of feel I'm capable of.
Yep.
And especially as far as a performing musician, because I'm not a very phenomenal piano player by any means, but I happen to have quite a fine one in my band. So why would I try to kind of half do something when I know someone that can probably take the reins on it. So, I think as a painter, maybe it's not necessarily a situation where you can hand the brush off to someone.
I definitely can have other artists look at my work, and we do that all the time.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think? This isn't working. This is working, and you get feedback from people, and that's definitely helpful. It's very helpful. But sometimes you can just be stuck.
Yeah. No, that's true. And I can't tell you how many things just sit, and I know that probably nothing's going to come of this. I'll come back to it every once in a while, try to make something happen, and it's hard to let it go because, you did put some work into it. Yeah. But I think that it's really important especially when considering making a record or making a full piece of music, is that if it's not right, then why would you want to represent your work? I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So, Brian, are there a couple things that you could tell people that are listening to this that would help them move things forward for themselves in using the creative part of their brain?
Yeah, well, as a independent musician and someone that where it's all DIY essentially, the promotion, all of those kind of elements that are not your favorite parts by any means, right? If I could just create, I'd be very happy with that. Mm-hmm. But I think that we kind of brushed on it earlier as well, is the motivation factor. Like, what is it that is going to get you up off the couch or get you to the computer or get that writing, happening, or picking up the brush, whatever your trade is that, it shouldn't take much to kind of get that spark.
Okay.
And I think that if you can run with that's the most important thing. For me, it was, if I tell myself, okay, I got to write 10 emails today to try to get somebody's ears on this, I need some people to hear this music. When you get that one response, 1 out of 10, if you're lucky sometimes, because, people are getting inundated by new music all the time. But sometimes it just takes that one guy to say, oh, hey, I really like this. Send me some more info. And you're realizing, okay, well, if 10 emails took me 10 minutes today,
okay,
what can I do 20 minutes tomorrow? Or, it's just little kind of steps like that when you're struggling. I think it's just most important to actually just do something, and you never know.
Yeah,
kind of thing. Fear is such a crippling thing sometimes, and you gotta. I think sometimes and it does sound really trite. Just take that chance, I guess, and you never know.
Yeah, I would agree. I always say that the universe. Well, I'm sure I didn't come up with this, but the universe responds to action. And sometimes it's just the littlest thing, but if you keep doing something, you will get a response. If you don't do anything because you're scared, you won't get a negative response. You won't fail, but you're definitely not going to succeed. But the universe definitely responds to action, whatever that may be. And I know, like, that's one of my philosophies is I'm just always trying to do something to keep things moving forward. Sometimes there's a strategy and a solid plan. Sometimes it's just, today I just need to do something.
Yeah. I think that the other important element of that, and at least for me as a creative person, is that is keeping that kind of sustained. Because it is easy to get that little bit of kind of euphoria and then get that little jolt and work for a little while and then kind of
bask in it
or drift off into old habits or all of those things. And when you don't have a team behind you, or when you don't have a manager that's
you have to be self-motivated.
Yeah, you really have to be self-motivated. And I think there's a reason why there's not 50 million successful artists out there. Because there are some people that struggle with that and never there's some people that never get the opportunity. And I guess the only way to know is just kind of make your own, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's something that I definitely struggle with, and I'm sure many people do, but hopefully I'll figure it out at some point.
And where can people find your music?
Yeah, so bestmanmusic.net. You can also find us on Spotify, on SoundCloud, pretty much anywhere, iTunes, all that. But it's Bestman, one word, and gotta be hip these days. So, but yeah, January 25th, and then keep an eye out for in the next couple of months for a couple new things as well.
So, Brian, thank you very much for this. This was an excellent conversation.
Thank you, Rick.
My name is Ricky McGuckran, and you have been listening to Eager to Know, the podcast. If you haven't already, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join me next week for another Eager to Know podcast.